The dust swirled around his feet, a constant reminder of the desolation that had become his world. Each step he took kicked up tiny clouds, the only movement in an otherwise still landscape. A lone figure stood amidst the skeletal remains of a once great city. Buildings that once touched the sky now lay in ruins, their grandeur reduced to rubble. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of a collapsing structure. John? John Smith, or was it? He couldn't be sure anymore. The days had blended into weeks and the weeks into months. Time had lost all meaning in this empty world. Did names even matter anymore? In a world devoid of people, what was the point of a name? It was just another relic of a bygone era, like the crumbling buildings around him. He was the last man on Earth, or at least he thought he was. The possibility of another survivor was a distant hope, one that he clung to despite the odds. At least he thought he was. Every day he searched for signs of life, but all he found were echoes of the past. The empty streets and abandoned buildings were his only companions. His days were a monotonous blur of scavenging for scraps, searching through the debris of a world that had moved on without him. He rummaged through the remnants of a civilization long gone, hoping to find something, anything that could make his existence a little more bearable. The remnants of a civilization long gone. The once bustling city was now a graveyard, its decaying structures standing as silent witnesses to the end of an era. Each day he walked through the ruins, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. He held on to memories, fading photographs that captured moments of joy and love. These images were his lifeline, a connection to a time when he wasn't alone. He often found himself staring at them, lost in the past, anything to remind him of the warmth of companionship. The silence was deafening, except when it wasn't. Sometimes he thought he heard whispers, the faint echoes of voices carried by the wind. But when he turned to look, there was nothing, just the empty city and the crushing loneliness that came with it. The world was a graveyard. Once bustling with life, it now lay in ruins, a testament to the passage of time and the fragility of human existence. Nature had begun to reclaim what was once hers, with vines and weeds creeping over the remnants of civilization. Buildings stood precariously, monuments to a forgotten era. Their walls, once strong and proud, now crumbled and decayed, whispering tales of a time long past. Each structure a silent witness to the lives that once thrived within. Cars lay rusted and buried under debris. These vehicles, once symbols of progress and freedom, now lay abandoned, their purpose lost. They were relics of a bygone age, slowly being consumed by the relentless march of nature. Not even the rustling of rats broke the silence. The alleyways, once filled with the sounds of daily life, were now eerily quiet. The absence of noise was a constant reminder of the emptiness that had taken over, just the constant, oppressive quiet. It was a silence that weighed heavily on the soul, a silence that spoke of loss and abandonment. The city, once alive with the hum of activity, now lay in a state of perpetual stillness. He would often climb the highest skyscraper he could find, hoping for a glimpse of something, anything alive. But there was nothing. From his vantage point, he could see the vast expanse of the city stretching out endlessly, devoid of any signs of life. Just the endless expanse of desolate concrete and steel. The streets, once filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life, were now empty and lifeless. The buildings, once towering symbols of human achievement, now stood as hollow shells, a wasteland stretching to the horizon. The city, once a beacon of hope and progress, was now a desolate landscape, a stark reminder of the impermanence of human endeavours. The horizon, once filled with promise, now only held the bleak reality of a world devoid of life. The silence was more than just the absence of sound. It was a weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. He yearned for a voice, a laugh, even a scream. He would talk to himself just to hear a human voice. He would tell himself stories, recount memories, anything to break the oppressive silence that threatened to swallow him whole. Sometimes he would swear he saw something out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement in a window, a shadow darting behind a building. But when he turned, there was nothing there. He dismissed it as a trick of his mind, loneliness playing games. His mind starved for interaction, conjuring up phantoms from the ether, but the doubt lingered. One particularly eerie evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, grotesque shadows, he heard it, a whisper, his name carried on the wind. "John," it seemed to say. He froze, his blood turning to ice. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no one there, just the wind, whistling through the empty buildings. Section 6. The Followed Feeling. From that day forward, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, followed. He would catch glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, but it was always gone when he turned to face it. The whispers started to come more frequently, always his name, always just out of reach. The line between reality and hallucination began to blur. Was he losing his mind? Section 7. Paranoia or reality. He started finding things out of place. A chair moved in the building he'd been using as a shelter, footprints in the dust that weren't his own. His once dismissed fears returned stronger than ever. He was no longer alone, but who or what was out there with him? In this desolate, abandoned world, what could possibly remain? The thought sent chills down his spine. Section 8. A chilling discovery. One day, while scavenging in an old library, he found a dusty, leather-bound journal. The library was a relic of the past, forgotten by time, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. It was a place where few dared to venture, a place that held secrets long buried and stories long forgotten. The writing inside was faded and difficult to make out, but the words that he could decipher chilled him to the bone. Each page seemed to whisper secrets of a world unseen, a world that existed in the shadows. The journal spoke of ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge, of things that should never be known by mortal men. The journal spoke of creatures, beings that existed just beyond the veil of reality. These were not mere figments of imagination, but entities that thrived in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to cross over into our world. They were described as shadows with eyes, beings that could see into the very soul of a person, beings that thrived on fear, on loneliness. They were drawn to the emotions that made humans vulnerable, feeding off the despair and hopelessness that lingered in the hearts of the lost. The journal detailed encounters with these beings, stories of people who had come face to face with the unknown and had never been the same again. Beings that were drawn to the last vestiges of humanity. They sought out those who were alone, those who had lost all hope, and they thrived on the fear that emanated from their souls. The journal was a warning, a testament to the existence of these otherworldly beings, and a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that we cannot see. A Gap 3S Section 9, The Unseen Stalker. As he clutched the journal tightly, John felt a chill run down his spine. The more he read, the more he realized that he was being watched. The feeling of being followed was no longer just a figment of his imagination. It was a reality that gnawed at his sanity. He began to notice subtle changes in his environment, shadows that seemed to move on their own, whispers that grew louder when he was alone, and a creeping sense of dread that he couldn't shake off. Every step he took seemed to be mirrored by an unseen presence, a silent stalker that watched his every move. One evening, as he sat in the dim light of a flickering candle, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. They were slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. John's heart raced as he strained to listen, the air thick with tension. He knew he wasn't alone, but he had to be sure. Gathering his courage, he decided to confront the source of the footsteps. He followed the sound, each step echoing in the silence. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing moment, the shadows closing in around him. He could feel their eyes on him, watching, waiting. The journal had warned him of these beings, and now he was face to face with the reality of their existence. The footsteps led him to an old, decrepit staircase. As he ascended, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. When he reached the top, he saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It watched him, unmoving, as if daring him to come closer. John knew this was it. The moment he had been dreading had finally arrived. He was no longer just a survivor in a desolate world. He was the hunted. The encounter left him shaken but more determined than ever. He had to uncover the truth, to find a way to fight back against the unseen. The journal had given him knowledge, and now he had to use it to survive. The whispers were no longer just in his mind. They were real, and they were coming for him. The final confrontation was inevitable, and John knew he had to be ready. The silence was no longer just a void. It was filled with the presence of the unseen, and it was closing in on him. Gap 3S, Section 10, the encounter. As the night fell, the air grew colder. John could see shadows moving, circling him. He gripped his weapon tightly, his heart racing. The whispers turned into guttural sounds, echoing through the empty streets. He knew this was it, the final encounter. He braced himself for the inevitable clash. The shadows closed in, their forms becoming more defined, yet still shrouded in darkness. John could feel their malevolent presence, an oppressive weight that bore down on him. Each step he took felt like a struggle against an invisible force. But he pushed forward, determined to face whatever awaited him. Suddenly the shadows lunged. John swung his weapon, the sound of metal slicing through the air echoing in the silence. He fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. Every move fueled by a primal instinct to survive. The shadows recoiled, but they were relentless, their guttural sounds growing louder, more frenzied. In the midst of the chaos, John caught a glimpse of something, a pair of eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, watching him with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. He realized then that the shadows were not just mindless beings, they were driven by a purpose, a dark intent that he had to uncover. As the battle raged on, John felt his strength waning, but he couldn't give up. He had come too far, endured too much. With a final, desperate surge of energy, he struck out, his weapon connecting with something solid. The shadows dissipated, their forms dissolving into the night, leaving John standing alone in the empty street, his breath ragged, his body trembling. He had survived the encounter, but the cost was high. The whispers had fallen silent, but he knew they were not gone. They were watching, waiting for the next opportunity. John knew he had to stay vigilant, to find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. The encounter had left him scarred, but it had also given him a new resolve. He would not be hunted anymore. He would become the hunter. Section 11, the aftermath. The battle was fierce, but John managed to fend off the creatures. He was bruised and battered, but alive. The whispers had ceased and the silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a silence of peace, not of dread. John knew he had won, but at what cost? He was still alone, but now he had hope. Hope that he could rebuild, that he could find others. The world was still a graveyard, but it was his graveyard, and he would make it a home. Section 9. The Haunting Truth. He looked up from the journal, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers seemed closer now, surrounding him. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He was not the last. He was the prey. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the unseen, and it was closing in.